in this country during this period. There are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which being that in the last period of tremendous struggle by our people in this country, in the 1960s in particular, the revolutionary leadership and revolutionary Black organizations were destroyed by the United States government under a program called counterintelligence, COINTEL, counterintelligence program, that articulated clear and distinct aims to wipe out the leadership of the Black liberation movement of this country. And I want to say this because a lot of people say, well, what happened to the Black Revolution? Or you hear some stupid new leader who says that somehow this is not the revolution of this is not your grandparents' movement or something to that effect, or that, okay, you guys failed, now it's up to us. No, what happened is anytime a genuine revolutionary movement rears its head, this country, the United States government has murdered people, and there are people still locked up in concentration camps that are called prisons today as a consequence of that movement. And there's a certain amount of arrogance that's promoted by the social system that allows a generation coming into existence to believe that they've invented history, that somehow things began with them. But this is really important. It's one of the reasons we have to have this discussion today. So we said that in terms of the United States government, it initiated shootouts between what should have been fraternal organizations. It initiated slander campaigns. And it cold-bloodedly murdered some people. You know of some of these people: Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, murdered in Chicago on December 4th, 1969. They were members of the Black Panther Party who, prior to being murdered in their sleep, had been drugged by secret police agents to make sure they would be helpless. Some of you may have heard of a young Black man named Carl Hampton, who was murdered in Houston, Texas. You may have heard of a 16-year-old Black youth named Bobby Hutton, who was a member of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, who was murdered even as he attempted to get away from the Oakland Police Department. I think he was shot something like 50 times. Some of you may know that people like Sundiata Acoli, Elmer Geronimo Pratt, Albert Newell Washington, and Anthony Bottoms, to name a few, are in prisons from that period. These were revolutionaries, Black revolutionaries. Some of you may know that Assata Shakur, even today, is on the run for her life as a consequence of this government consciously murdering people who led a revolutionary movement that spoke to the deep and fundamental aspirations and needs of African people, particularly Black people, Black workers and poor people in this country. As a consequence of these revolutionaries and many others having been imprisoned, the term revolution has come to mean something else. It has been taken out of the hands of the revolutionaries ourselves. It is so bad that every time General Motors introduces a new car, they tell you that this car has revolutionary features. If there's a new soap detergent introduced, they tell you this soap detergent has revolutionary characteristics. The fact that they do this, though, is a good thing, not a bad thing. It means that revolution is good and not bad. It means even corporations, which are responsible for the terror and oppression of the vast majority of the peoples around the world, know that the people want revolution. For example, you can imagine General Motors or some soap company introducing a television, a car, a detergent that is reactionary. You can imagine them saying, we have a new reactionary automobile for you, a new reactionary soap product for you. In fact, everybody who is attempting to convince the masses that a thing is good has to use the term revolutionary or progressive or on the forward side of history in order to convince the masses that it is something they should be associated with. One of the first things that any reactionary who seizes power anywhere on the planet does is to name this association that has power a revolutionary council or something or other, because revolution is good. Masses of poor people, poor and oppressed people around the world need revolution, want something that transforms this terrible reality that we are confronted with into something that is good for us. I think it's important to say that I am a revolutionary. I think it's important to say that one of the reasons the term revolutionary has fallen into such disfavor, even if it's not simply something that is ignored, is because the concept has been taken out of the hands of the people who need who most need revolution and put into the hands who are opposed to revolution. So you have the people who oppose the revolution now having possession of the term revolution, and the people who need revolution are being beat over the head and told how revolution is bad. The Black Revolution was crushed in the 60s, and this is something that you and I should never, never, never forget. We've seen evidence of a lot of new formations and personalities who put themselves out as revolutionaries, but they don't advance the same kind of questions, revolutionary questions, as your leaders and my leaders were advancing in the 60s. Our leaders had mobilized Black people so effectively that J. Edgar Hoover, who was then head of the FBI, had to declare that the Black movement in this country represented the greatest internal threat to the security of the U.S. since the Civil War. Instead of revolutionary motion in the last period, rather what we've been seeing is organizations, groups, and personalities who call themselves revolutionaries, but all they do is hold talk fests, discussion groups, and perhaps a demonstration or two. What is it that really characterizes a revolutionary movement? What is it that really characterizes a revolutionary situation in any country on the planet? Why is it that Ronald Wilson Reagan and General Alexander Haig and various representatives of the white ruling class in this country are so opposed to revolution? General Alexander Haig was a guy who had been in the U.S. Army as a general, as it's stated here. And Ronald Wilson Reagan, when he became president of the United States, chose Haig to be his, what do you call it? This is in other countries called like foreign minister or secretary of state. So the secretary of state of the United States government, the guy or the person that's most responsible for being the diplomatic representative of the government, was a damn general. And that's a statement about what the US government saw as its task at that moment. Why is it that they are so opposed to what is happening in places like El Salvador and Nicaragua? Why is it that they were so opposed to what was happening in Grenada? Why is it that even now they are putting together plans for preemptive strikes, as they call it, against governments outside this country and against organizations and people inside this country that justifies murder and the same kind of terror they used at the end of the 60s by virtue of being able to say that these people are terrorists and that's why we killed them. In fact, the concept of terrorists got really consolidated in this country with the Reagan administration, and General Alexander Haig was the one, because the United States and white power were fighting against people who were characterized as freedom fighters all around the world. Every place you looked up, people were engaged in struggles for liberation. And so what the Reagan administration, using Alexander Haig as his mouthpiece, declared was that from now on, these people are not going to be referred to as freedom fighters. We're going to refer to them as terrorists. So this is not a new thing that we're hearing, the so-called war against terrorism. It was really consolidated during the Reagan administration. And Reagan, by the way, was a Republican president, had been Republican governor of California. There's supposed to be this great distinction between Democrats and Republicans, but it was Reagan who introduced the whole concept of people who are fighting for freedom as terrorists. And that was a Republican president that did that in 1984. And here it is 2016. Of course, you got a Democratic president who's mouthing the same garbage, that people who just want to be free are terrorists. And then one thing that makes them terrorists is because they don't have F-16s and they don't have drones that they can send and murder people at wedding parties and stuff like that from a distance. They are terrorists because they have to use cheap, inexpensive methods to kill their opponents. They have to strap on dynamite and stuff like that and go into crowded places because they don't have the ability to send a bomb from someplace in Utah using guided missiles or drones and things like that to do it. So one is terrorism because they're poor and can walk right up to you. The other is not a terrorist because they are rich and they can fight you from a distance, and you don't even have to see them, and they don't have to see you right up front either. It is because revolution is not an incident. And, you know, this is a response again to the question of why they are murdering people and have to characterize people as terrorists. And we say that it is because revolution is not an incident. Revolution is not a demonstration. Revolution is a process. It is a social movement. It is something that transforms the lives and the conditions and the ideas in the heads of people throughout a society. It is characterized for the most part by mobilizing and activating the oppressed people who are suffering from the conditions themselves. For example, in El Salvador, now we have a revolutionary process in motion. It is a process that demands the attention of everybody in El Salvador and the masses of people around the world. It is impossible to ignore the Salvadoran revolution. Why is that the case? It is certainly not because of the phony elections the Reagan administration has put forward there. It is certainly not because of this man Duarte, who is a social democrat or a Christian Democrat. It is because the masses of workers and peasants in El Salvador have decided that they will no longer live in the fashion that this government and other governments in the past have determined they should live. El Salvador is a place in what they call Central America. It is a tiny, it's a place where there's this Central America, this tiny belt separating, well, you'd have to, you know, well, the map is not here, but, and it is close to Nicaragua. It is close to Panama, close to Honduras and other places in that block of tiny entities that were created mostly by the Spanish when they took over that territory, and people wanted to be free. Spain was the original white country. That's why they speak Spanish in El Salvador and most of South America, because there's white people from Spain came there, and they came there in part initially because, certainly at one juncture, the main task was to spread free labor, African people who had been kidnapped from Africa and brought to work for white people. And Spain was one of the white countries that we were working for, and the British, we were working for them free. And they brought us here. They took us to other parts in the islands and what have you. They separated our families and stuff like that. That's how the whole system got set up off of the land of the people in El Salvador, that's now called El Salvador, but who are indigenous people who might be called Indians. They speak Spanish because the white man who came there and took over the country spoke Spanish, and because in every instance they would force the people who they dominated to speak their language, and that made it easier for them to control us. So the fact of the matter is that a revolutionary process is characterized more than anything by the victims of a system taking control of our own lives, being in motion and transforming our own conditions. Not the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, but the working class, poor Black folks ourselves must take the power into our hands to transform our own conditions. That is the thing that characterizes a revolutionary process. Anybody who is familiar with the 60s can be clear that this is what was happening during the 60s. In the 60s, for example, more than any other organization that we know of, the Black Panther Party characterized the revolutionary process. A lot of people attempt to write the Black Panther Party out of history because a lot of historical revisionism is happening in this country during this time. The Black Panther Party was an organization of working class people, of Black people, cats just off the street, people who were scrambling day to day, just trying to make ends meet. It was an organization of people who are representative of the fact that thousands of Black women in this country will see their babies die in the